George Orwell is, without doubt, one of the great English writers of the 20th century. His novels Animal Farm and 1984 have pretty much defined the dystopia for the last however many decades, and they've set a benchmark for political satire. But before he became a novelist, Orwell made his bones as a journalist and essayist. And Orwell's essay, Politics in the English Language, may be the most important essay on political thinking penned in the English language in the 20th century. Politics in the English Language is basically the nonfiction version of 1984. He gets all the themes that he lays out, that he draws out and shows in action in 1984, and he compresses them. This is several years before he wrote 1984. He compresses them and delivers them straightforward in a nonfiction essay. It's pretty powerful. Orwell's thesis, essentially, is that language has been corrupted. Its corruption has come from social, political, and economic causes, and the corruption of language has led to further corruption in the social and political realms. In other words, the decline of culture is a vicious cycle. For Orwell, the English language becomes ugly and inaccurate because our thoughts are foolish, but the slovenliness of our language makes it easier for us to have foolish thoughts. But this isn't an inescapable trap. There is a way out. Orwell sees this decline of language and this decline of political thought as a result of bad habits. And so, if one gets rid of these habits, one can think more clearly. And to think clearly is a necessary first step toward political regeneration, so that the fight against bad English is not frivolous and is not the exclusive concern of professional writers. So clear thinking and clear writing have a one-to-one connection. If one side is vague and muddled, the other side is going to be as well. But Orwell's kind enough to provide us 5 examples of such muddled writing from some of the professional publications of his day. I'm only going to read you one of them, and this is the one I think is the most egregious. It's from an essay on psychology in Politics, which is a highly respected, peer-reviewed academic journal. Let's see if we can make it out. On the one side, we have the free personality. By definition, it is not neurotic, for it has neither conflict nor dream. Its desires, such as they are transparent, for they are just what institutional approval keeps in the forefront of consciousness. Another institutional pattern would alter their number and intensity. There is little in them that is natural, irreducible, or culturally dangerous. But, on the other side, the social bond itself is nothing but the mutual reflection of these self-secure integrities. Recall the definition of love. Is not this the very picture of a small academic? Where is there a place in this hall of mirrors for either personality or fraternity? I've read that passage well over a dozen times, and the best response I've been able to come up with is, what the... Maybe with more context, we might know what the free personality is, but given the nature of the language in this paragraph, I kind of doubt it. Just look at how many abstractions, generalizations, and judgments this thing is loaded with. Free personality, neurotic, conflict, dream, desires, transparent. What the heck are transparent desires anyway? Are those wishes you can see through? Institutional approval, gotta love that one. Number, intensity, natural, irreducible, culturally dangerous. What in God's name? Culturally dangerous. The mutual reflection of these self-secure integrities. This is assault and battery on the English language, guys. And then we get to the astonishing conclusion that the definition of love is the very picture of the small academic. And that this has something to do with a hall of mirrors. I'm not sure if that's supposed to be figurative or literal, but it somehow doesn't have anything to do with personality or fraternity. Now I put it to you. Where, in that 5-sentence, 11-clause paragraph, can we find a single concrete detail, a single image or referent to attach meaning to? Does that paragraph call any sensory details to mind? Can we picture it in our heads in any way? Can we even put ourselves in the speaker's shoes and reasonably infer his or her meaning? Now, if you can, you are a greater reader than I and a greater reader than George Orwell, who refers to that entire passage as simply meaningless. So what are the sins of modern prose that result in such messy word vomit? For Orwell, this mixture of vagueness and sheer incompetence is the most marked characteristic of modern English prose, and especially of any kind of political writing. As soon as certain topics are raised, the concrete melts into the abstract, and no one seems able to think of turns of speech that are not hackneyed. Prose consists less and less of words chosen for the sake of their meaning, and more of phrases tacked together like the sections of a prefabricated henhouse. So what are these sins? What exactly do people do in order to dodge being clear, dodge actually writing with meaning? Well, the first one is dying metaphors, also known as cliches. For Orwell, there is a huge dump of worn-out metaphors which have lost all evocative power and are merely used because they save people the trouble of inventing phrases for themselves. We have even more of these in our time than Orwell did in his time, but some of the ones he calls out are ring the changes on, take up the cudgel for, toe the line, ride roughshod over, stand shoulder to shoulder with, play into the hands of, no axe to grind, grist to the mill, fishing in troubled waters, on the order of the day, Achilles' heel, swan song, hotbed. We're still using a lot of these today. We've only added to the problem. Another great sin of modern writers is operators or verbal false limbs, or their dependence thereon. This essentially involves eliminating simple verbs and clear nouns and replacing them with phrases, often which are stated in passive voice. Instead of being a single word, such as break, stop, spoil, mend, kill, a verb becomes a phrase made up of a noun or adjective tacked onto some general purpose verb, such as prove, serve, form, play, render. These phrases are to render inoperative, militate against, make contact with, be subjected to, give rise to, give grounds for, have the effect of, play a leading role, make itself felt, take effect, exhibit a tendency to, serve the purpose of, etc., etc., etc. All of that is verbal crap. All of that is just messy word vomit that gets in the way of your actual meaning of what you're actually trying to say. Another sin, and boy are my students often guilty of this one, pretentious diction. In essence, this is those people who like to use the word utilize instead of use. Why use a 3-syllable word when a 1-syllable word would do? Use, not utilize. Simple. The thing is that I see is people think they sound smarter when they're using pretentious diction, but the actual effect is the opposite. They sound more confusing, more pretentious, and hence more dumb. For Orwell, the result, in general, is an increase in slovenliness and vagueness. Another problem that Orwell points out is meaningless words. These are often words attached to abstract qualities, or to just about any ism you can name. For instance, the word fascism now has no meaning except insofar as it signifies something not desirable. The words democracy, socialism, freedom, patriotic, realistic, justice have each of them several different meanings which cannot be reconciled with each other. Words of this kind are often used in a consciously dishonest way. That is, the person who uses them has his own private definition, but allows his hearer to think he means something quite different. Orwell's obviously got a bone to pick with political writers, but I don't really teach people who are trying to write about politics, at least not in my classes, but when they are trying to storytell, they do still often use these words that don't have any real meaning because they think that they do have meaning. And this vague meaning, this kind of implied, sort of, kind of wishy-washy, maybe sort of kind of means that, is enough. And the problem is, most of the time, it's not. Leaving things vague just makes your story frustrating. Then he does this, and this is, I mean, it makes a mockery of the English language here, intentionally. He takes this passage from the book of Ecclesiastes in the King James Bible. I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill, but time and chance happeneth to them all. Pretty clear, right? I asked my students, who are all teenagers, if they could figure out what this passage meant, and just about every single one of them was able to figure out that, yeah, it doesn't matter how skilled or strong you are, luck, chance, and fate are going to play a role in how well you succeed. Here's how Orwell translates that into modern English, which is the way it might be written today, particularly in academic circles, but even oftentimes in newspapers, in arguments, you hear this kind of jargon a lot. Objective considerations of contemporary phenomena compel the conclusion that success or failure in competitive activities exhibits no tendency to be commensurate with innate capacity, but that a considerable element of the unpredictable must invariably be taken into account. Brilliant! The gist of the problem, as Orwell sees it, is that the whole tendency of modern prose is away from concreteness. Inflated language, cliché, jargon, euphemism, all of these are signs of laziness and or insincerity in the writer, and the acceptance of them is a sign of laziness and or complacency in the reader. For Orwell, but if thought corrupts language, language can also corrupt thought. A bad usage can spread by tradition and imitation, even among people who should and do know better. Now, Orwell says this in the context of admitting that he himself commits the sins he complains about and has committed each one of them in this essay. For instance, he advises us not to use passive voice in a sentence which uses passive voice. So the disease affects everyone, even the doctor trying to prescribe for it. But this disease does have a cure, and that cure is not some old-fashioned pedantry or linguistic conservatism. Instead, Orwell prescribes that what is above all needed is to let the meaning choose the word, and not the other way around. When we think of concretes, we think of the object first, or the event, and then we try to find the right words to express it. When we think in abstractions, we tend to call the word to mind first, and then other related abstract terms tend to come in and fill the gaps, at the expense of blurring or even changing your meaning. In response to the lazy thinking endemic to modern writing, Orwell gives us 6 rules to follow to keep our prose as clear as possible. Number 1, never use a metaphor, simile, or other figure of speech which you are used to seeing in print. In other words, avoid cliches. Never use a long word where a short one will do. In other words, don't be pretentious. If it is possible to cut a word out, always cut it out. Longer doesn't mean better. As a matter of fact, it's usually the opposite. Never use the passive where you can use the active. Doesn't mean never use passive voice. Just means don't use it if you can reasonably avoid it, because the active reads quicker, it reads stronger, it's more alive, and it's more attention-grabbing, less boring, less confusing. There are times when you need to use passive voice, but the active should take dominance in your prose most of the time. Never use a foreign phrase, a scientific word, or a jargon word if you can think of an everyday English equivalent. Again, don't be pretentious. Rule 6, break any of these rules sooner than say anything outright barbarous. So they're not really rules, more like guidelines. I first read this essay and applied it to my own writing in a prose style class back in college, and it made me a better writer almost instantly. But that said, there is a reason why I reread and teach this essay every year. I still catch myself committing all of these word crimes, and I need the constant reminder to check myself before I wreck myself. I suggest you take a look at some of your own writing and see if you can spot some Orwellian sins. Do you use stale cliches instead of original images? $100 words where 10-cent words will do? Use weak phrases instead of specific nouns and strong verbs? Make liberal use of passive voice because you think it makes you sound educated? It doesn't. Load your prose with jargon words and isms to keep your meaning nice and vague? If so, if any of this applies to you, take heart. We all do it. And we can all find our way out of the mire. Per Orwell, if you simplify your English, you are freed from the worst follies of orthodoxy. This is crucial because, for Orwell, orthodoxy, of whatever color, seems to demand a lifeless, imitative style. This is one of the huge complaints that he's illustrating in 1984. The problem of orthodoxy, everyone being 100% orthodox, 100% to the letter on their beliefs. This is what leads to lazy thinking, lazy writing, poor communication, and down the road, political disaster. So getting beyond that style is a significant step in starting to think for ourselves, like individuals, like human beings, like writers. Try applying these rules to your own work, especially in rewriting or revising, and see how your prose improves. Please leave any comments about Orwell, the English language, or being a writer down below. And like the video and subscribe to the channel, guys. I appreciate all of you. We're rocking it, and I really love this lesson, so I hope to get some good discussion going. And until next time, good luck and good writing. Peace.